Hi there, this is Pat, and I want to talk a little bit about TestOut Chapter 2, and I'm going to cover about three-fourths the content in Chapter 2 real quick. And my goal is to not cover everything in great detail, but rather just kind of provide additional content or provide clarity so that when you're going through the TestOut material, the content makes more sense. So thank you, and with that, we'll get started. And if we take a look at test out, we'll notice that there's a chapter on versions, Windows installation, upgrades, and then Hyper-V. My plan right now is just to talk about sections 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3, and Hyper-V a different time. All right, so here we go. Windows updates. So there's throughout the chapter, they talk about Windows updates and Windows upgrades. And there's a little bit of overlap, but really, when we look at the kind of updates that we can get from Microsoft, we can either get a cumulative update or a feature update. A cumulative update is, or quality update, also known as a cumulative update. They're mandatory. They come out every month. They come out on what's known as Patch Tuesday. Typically, it's the second Tuesday of the month, but Microsoft does have a mechanism in place that they can send a patch out immediately if need be. The big thing with the updates, with the quality updates, are that they typically are like either fixing security exploits, essentially making the product more stable. You occasionally might see a new feature or some visual changes, but those are minor. Typically, it's more, let's get the operating system more stable and more secure. Feature updates, on the other hand, that's like getting a whole new operating system. We see those about once a year, and typically they are, they're identified currently as like 22H2, 23H2, 24H2. So that would be, 2022. H2 meaning the second half. So every 12 months we will see that we get a new edition of Windows. All right, so that takes care of quality updates and feature updates. Regarding an upgrade, it will be considered an upgrade when you're moving from, say, Windows 11 to Windows 12. You could also consider it an upgrade when you move between versions. So if you're going to go from Windows Home to Windows Professional, that could be considered an upgrade as well. Typically, that upgrade can be done with something as simple as putting in a new product key. And also, you could consider an upgrade going from 22H2 to 23H2. So you could consider a feature update to be a Windows upgrade, because technically you're getting a whole new operating system when that happens. Microsoft has kind of adopted the position that they would like to have users every year getting the new edition of their operating system. So that way, like, they're kind of moving the entire population along with a single, like, getting comfortable with their operating system. Back in the day when you'd get, like, say, every 3 or 4 years, you'd see a new edition of Windows come out. Well, the problem there was people would complain because they got all used to using, I don't know, Windows 7, and then 3 years later, something else comes out, and they're all complaining about it. And so Microsoft is like, you know what? Instead, let's just every year, let's give them a new edition of Windows and just kind of force people to move along. You'll also see that these editions are good for about 2 years from the date that they're released. So when you upgrade to a new edition, you have less than 2 years, and you're going to have to plan on upgrading to the next edition and next edition. And if you don't, well, then you're going to miss out on the quality updates, which are kind of a big deal. Systems that don't have quality updates are considered unpatched, and they are vulnerable to data theft and less stable operating systems. So there's really no reason to not do that. All right. The Windows Insider program. So this is, TestOut mentions the Insider program. Basically, we can, if we like to, we can, as individuals can choose to see kind of like what the new like the new edition of Windows is that's coming out. They kind of get an early look at it, or look at new features. So I will share the links to these slides, but if we just go to this link here, Preview Windows, we can get some more information about the Insider program. There's a video that you can watch on your own here if you want to check it out. It's a nice 2-minute video on how to configure your system to participate in the Insider program. But to me, the big takeaway is that there's different channels that dictate how mature of a product is that you're going to get. Also, if I take a look at this flight hub here, I think is interesting. We can see, like, regarding, let's say, Windows 11 24H2. Had I been part of this, like one of the inside the preview channels, I think it's called, like, I forget what the RP stands for here, but like release preview channel. The general public started seeing this operating system on new machines in June, and it's the end of August, and I still haven't seen the like the latest version, the 2024 version push out to my laptop. But had I been part of this one of these channels here, I could have downloaded the ISO to Windows 11 2024 H2 back on June 19th, so like two months ago. And if we kind of look way back at the development, we can see back in early early 2024, and even before that, this canary channel is the first column here. This is like the most unstable column or unstable channel. But wow, we could have gone 2023. We could have been looking at some early releases of this operating system. So the point is, if you want, a company can choose this, can get involved with this Insider program, set up some hardware dedicated to it, and depending on what channel they're in, they can get very unstable to a very stable operating system. The release preview that just comes out. That typically contains content that's just about ready to be released by Microsoft, so it's fairly stable. Anyways, why would you want that? Things like if you're a content creator, if you work for a large organization and you want to make sure your software is going to work when a new version of Windows comes out, then that would be a good reason to be part of this Insider program and have dedicated hardware set up for that. As an end user, in my mind, no way. There's no way I'd mess around with this. I want a more stable operating system. I don't mind waiting a few more months to get a few new bells and whistles in my operating system. And I just found, like, they had a note in the canary channel. Remember, that's the least stable one, and that's for the people that are really comfortable. They just kind of are curious what's coming out, but it was just interesting. I just saw some content that people found in the canary channels. There was better access to photos on your mobile devices. They made a big deal about the Windows setup experience, which kind of relates to Chapter 2, how that got reworked. So on the left, this before screen here, that's kind of the way it's been for 20 years, and here's what it looks like now. So, anyways, if you're part of this Insiders program, you can get an idea of what's coming down the road as far as Microsoft's products and what they're going to look like. Onward. So we've already talked about these the various editions of Microsoft, like 22H2, 21H2. Additionally, there's also a version number associated with them, and the reason that Microsoft has version numbers is because there actually are, like, if we're looking at the example on the right here, version 23H2, we would notice that Microsoft actually released a number of different versions associated with 23H2, and what these versions included were basically quality updates, those cumulative updates. So the build number reflects what version operating system we're talking about, 22H2, and then the part after that, in this case, 23H2 always begins with this 22631 in there. That's consistent, but the remaining numbers would kind of indicate what quality updates have been added to that download. So if you're troubleshooting somebody's system, looking at the build number might give you a clue as to perhaps their system is not running the latest version of Windows 11, or that you think they are, so that they claim they are, things like that. So the build number can be helpful in some troubleshooting situations to give you a really good idea of what the user is actually running on their system. Another side note, as we're talking about the different versions and editions of Windows, it's just important to note, like I mentioned previously, like for example, when 2023H2 came out in October of 2023, and 2 years later about, home users will no longer see support. If you're an enterprise user or education or enterprise, you are going to see support extend out an extra year. So it's just keep in mind that you get 2 to 3 years on each one of these editions of Windows when they come out. So they're always forcing you to keep moving along. And there is this long-term service channel that typically we'll see that Microsoft will push that out sometimes. So instead of 2 years, you might get 5 years out of an operating system. But for now, what we see in this chart here is an OS was released, 2 years later, it's outdated, and you need to have already upgraded to the next edition if you want to keep your system stable and secure. TestOut talks a little bit about features on demand. Essentially, when you install an operating system, there's a whole bunch of other features that could be enabled with a simple checkbox. So let me just real quick, I'm going to connect to my my laptop. Hopefully. Oh, it shut itself down. So let me pause this real quick. All right, so my laptop is up and running again, and I'm just using Google's remote desktop to connect to it. Just to quick kind of show you this features on demand. The reason I'm doing this is this laptop is not managed, so I have full administrative access to it. And what I want to do is just show you those features on demand real quick. So I can just scroll down to more Windows features, and if you look at this checkbox here, of the screen here, there's a number of features that all I have to do is just simply hit the checkbox to enable it. So prior to recording this, I did enable like Hyper-V and Windows Sandbox. So again, this is on my laptop. But if we take a quick peek at that, I am running Windows Sandbox already. So that was, I think it required a reboot, but Windows Sandbox. And really, this is just a Microsoft gives people with the Sandbox enabled the ability to spin up a virtual machine that they can kind of play around with. And when they shut the machine down, all the settings go away. So it's just kind of like having a virtual machine that you can experiment with. I think because you're becoming an IT professional, you are an IT professional, you wouldn't use this. You'd rather just use Hyper-V and create your own virtual machines. So that's what you'll learn about more towards the end of Chapter 2 in TestOut. So I installed a few browsers on here, and you'll notice if I close it, and if I relaunch it again, all those changes are gone because this is a sandbox environment where you play around with the stuff, and then when you're done, it all goes away. All right, onward. All right, let's see here. Other examples of features on demand which I have on my laptop, I have this Windows Subsystem Linux on there. So again, on my laptop, I can launch a Linux environment if I want to. Again, this was just a simple feature on demand. Click the box and let her go. And when that comes back, it won't be too exciting. My slide's more exciting, but basically I'll just I can get to a Linux command prompt, a Linux terminal, and start using Linux commands. So I think Microsoft is embracing, my laptop froze on me, so we're gonna just keep moving on here. Pause this for 1 second. All right, so anyways, my laptop rebooted, I connected to it, and if it doesn't crash again, I will launch Windows Subsystem Linux. and now I am in a Linux environment, and I can mess around with Linux. And it is possible, like I mentioned in the slide, that you can, oops, didn't like that command. But anyways, that's my Linux environment. And it is possible to launch GUI-based applications as well. Again, what I prefer to do, since I have Hyper-V installed on this device, I'll just create an Ubuntu virtual machine instead, and I won't have to use Microsoft's Windows subsystem Linux. And I think I'll keep moving so that this recording doesn't get too long here. TestOut does make the point that you can consider an operating system to be a layer in between your applications and your hardware, which makes complete sense. If you're a software developer writing applications like Word, Excel, a game, whatever it is, the last thing you want to worry about is telling your developers to figure out how to access the hardware. No, you just tell your applications to talk to your operating system, and you let your operating system talk to the hardware. And we know that typically occurs with drivers. For what it's worth, when you install Hyper-V on a machine, it actually does add a layer in between your hardware and your operating system called a hypervisor. And then if you have multiple OSs or operating systems, they all talk to the hypervisor, which then in turn talks to the hardware. So, side note, more on that if you take a class on virtualization. We'll kind of skip through this here. I think these terms are all pretty straightforward. Perhaps the only one that no, these are all good. We're going to keep moving on. You can kind of consider your operating system. There is a kernel. That's, they say that's that's the part of the OS that loads into memory when your system turns on, and then that loads in memory, and then you have utilities that interact with the kernel, and then you either have like a command line or a GUI-based interface that interacts with the utilities, and then finally the user would so essentially the user interacts with the interface, which interacts with the utilities, which interacts with the kernel of your operating system. So this is a way of representing your OS. This is a command line interface. I'm sure that's not too exciting for you, and this is a graphical user interface. Now you're laughing at me. But I think the takeaway from this is you all are going to have to get familiar with using the command line interface. We're seeing a lot of environments that are using this because it's a more efficient way of getting your job done in less time. And also, as far as like documentation goes, it's much easier to show someone what you did with a long text file full of commands or a script versus trying to document a bunch of button clicks and mouse combinations. So, anyways, that takes care of that. And so, TestOut does talk about different editions of their operating system. We have Home, Professional for Workstation, Enterprise. And that's a subset. I know there's also an Education edition, which is pretty much the same as Enterprise, but Education costs way less than it's for schools. A lot of the features and things that we talk about in this course, like Remote Desktop and Hyper-V, they won't run on the Home edition. So just for what it's worth, as we work through the course together, there are some products or features that require a specific edition. Alrighty, onward. TestOut does a fantastic job, in my opinion, of exposing you to content that we typically wouldn't see to more advanced courses. So one of them would be group policies. Hyper-V they exposed to you in week 1, which I thought was amazing. They'll talk about BitLocker, but I'm just going to focus on group policies real quick. And partway through the curriculum in Chapter 2, let's connect to my laptop again. They talk about this group policy editor, and I was thinking, like, as a new student in IT, like, what the heck is a group policy editor, and what is it editing? Well, here you go. So I fired up a group policy editor on my laptop, and I can use this tool to configure, thousands of things on my device. I can configure the security settings on it. I can configure I can configure it to install software. I could use it to manage what my users can and can't do. So there's a tremendous number of settings I can control the, configure the control panel, the desktop. I can do folder redirection. Perhaps I want a user's desktop or a user's documents folder to be moved over to a file server somewhere. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Crazy amount. Well, it's overwhelming, and it's not the most straightforward tool in the world. But the point is, yeah, this is great. This is okay, I guess, if you're configuring one system. But the more important piece that I don't know if it's explained clearly or not is that this same interface exists on a server in a domain environment, and I can then use this same tool, same interface, but when I make changes, I can have it impact all the computers in my environment, not just the local one that I'm on. So one change, you can impact 1,000 computers. I know that I want to keep this recording quick, but I always laugh. We have a faculty that works here that he did something like this at work once and went out for a nice long lunch. And when he came back, he found out he had locked out the entire hospital from being able to log into their computers. So that's one of those events that takes a lot of apologizing. Anyways, one change affected a whole boatload of computers. So group policies, more on that this semester. This Windows 11 professional for workstations, it's just, to me, most of us are never going to support a machine like this or work with it, but imagine a workstation that had 4 CPUs and 6 terabytes of RAM. Oh my goodness, or persistent memory. So even if the machine turns off, you turn it back right on, it just picks up right where it left off. So there's some crazy, there are some systems out there that require an incredible amount of processing power, and that's where we would use Pro for workstations. I have a son-in-law that did a lot of image processing, like analyzing MRI scans of people's brains, and it would take forever for them to go through and crunch through their data. A system like this running Windows Pro for workstations and a high-end system could have done amazingly well. It could have been a huge benefit to them. We do hear about Windows Enterprise throughout the semester. Just keep in mind that operating system is actually a subscription-based model. So, for example, if we're GE Medical Systems and we decide to use Microsoft, we want to have Microsoft Enterprise available to in our environment. We want to use that for our workstations, for our users. It's a subscription-based. We could decide to pay $33 per user per month, and we would get Windows Enterprise along with some cloud storage and some Microsoft 365 apps. And it goes up to almost $55 a month to get some level of to get all these different features or services from Microsoft. So, anyways, Microsoft Enterprise is a subscription-based product. You need to first have Windows Professional, and then from that, you then would purchase Enterprise, and your system would move up to Enterprise level of control and security. All right, so I've already talked a bit about domain. Well, let me just real quickly. So when TestOut talks about domain access, what they're talking about is a domain controller, and then clients that connect to that domain controller. So the domain controller does things like it takes care of authentication. It can control. You can have control over what users can and can't do on your systems. It can manage all of your devices. So in a domain environment, a large environment, you have one or more domain controllers that are essentially used to control the clients and the storage devices and print devices in your organization. That's the expensive solution, but incredibly necessary in today's environment where you have organizations with thousands of computers or tens of thousands of computers worldwide. We could use domain controllers or domain environment to manage those. On the small side, you could have a work group. That's pretty much each device is autonomous. There is no shared information between the devices, but it works real good. If you have a small, you got 10 computers sitting in a small office somewhere and that's it, this would be a fine solution for you. But there is no account. There's each device has its own account. Each device is managed separately. And there's probably some third-party tools that we could use to somewhat do that. But again, you have work groups and you have domains. And something that's not pictured here, but we'll learn more about this semester, is there's also the ability for organizations to not have to manage their own domain controllers. You can actually, from Microsoft, essentially have them create a domain controller for you, Azure Active Directory, and essentially your clients, when they log in, they're authenticating in the cloud, against the domain controller in the cloud, and that environment can kind of provide like identity management and provide your users access to different cloud-based resources. So that's kind of cool. Okay, even as I'm sitting here, no, I won't get sidetracked. We'll cover more later this semester. We've talked about remote desktop briefly when I demoed with my Google remote desktop, but Microsoft has their own remote desktop product, and it uses this remote desktop protocol. But I think TestOut does a fantastic job demoing this, so I won't spend too much time on it. But for now, let's just say it's possible in the Microsoft operating system for an individual from at home or from a different machine to be able to remote into a device somewhere else, just like I illustrated previously with my Google remote desktop. And they do provide more than just being able to get keystrokes back and forth. I mean, you can do things like share files back and forth. You can, they can be configured to optimize for like low bandwidth connections and still be able to efficiently manage your device. The device on the remote system the sound can be, played back on the system that you're connecting from, and there's a lot you can do with Microsoft's remote desktop product that's built into their operating system, which I believe has to be at least Windows Professional, not Home. There's a group policy editor, and we're getting there, almost done. TestOut does talk about doing clean installs or upgrades for Windows, and I think if I just jumped out real quickly, let's just take a look real quick at Windows 11 Microsoft site. If I'm setting up a system and I want to install the latest version of Windows 11, I could go to Microsoft site here. They do provide a tool that would let me essentially check to see if my PC is capable of running Windows 11. There's a lot of machines out there now that are running Windows 10 that will never run Windows 11. Side note. But we then would have some options on how we could upgrade our system from one OS to the next, and we would see a screen like this. I could see it happening one of two ways. One would be if I decided to create some installation media, where I would boot my machine up off the installation media, and I would eventually get to a screen saying, hey, do you want to leave everything as is and just replace the operating system with a newer one, or do you want to blow everything away and do what's called a clean install? So, so we could have Windows create the installation media for us. We could download an ISO of Windows 11. And ISO, I always think of an ISO as almost like being a zip file of a DVD. So back in the day, people would take a DVD and they'd install an operating system that was on the DVD onto their laptop or desktop. And this ISO file format or whatever essentially takes every file, every folder, all the boot information on that DVD and burns it into a single file, an ISO file. So I could download one of those right now. I did it actually before recording. I think I did it twice. Yeah, they're about, looks like, tried it 3 times. How's that for being compulsive? But there we go. They're about 6.5 gigabytes. So that would have our OS on it. All right. When you do an upgrade, when you go from one OS to another, or even like just, when you do a operating system upgrade, it's worth noting that there actually is this folder that's kept around that has the old operating system on it and your your user data that is in there too. I wouldn't count on that as being a backup. It's only around for about 10 days, I believe, but there is a, if you install an operating system and you're like, God, I wish I had the old one back, this thing is really unstable, I can't, it doesn't work with my 3D printer, or whatever it is, you can always roll back and get your old one. Eventually this file gets, eventually this folder gets deleted or emptied out, but for what it's worth, Microsoft does keep the old version just in case you decide to go back. It makes sense though that, you wouldn't want to rely on that to be your backup if you're trying an OS upgrade. Obviously, you'd want to back up your data first. And I think TestOut even talks about creating like creating an, what do they call it? Creating a system image. That's a system image. Think of a system image like a second ago I was just telling you that like an ISO file is like I captured like the contents of a DVD into a single file. A system image would be like, let's take the hard drive that my machine's booting off of, and let's take all that information and put it into a single file, a system image. More on that in chapter 2. In theory, you should check your system first before you attempt the upgrade too, to make sure that it'll support, has the appropriate hardware. That's a big deal now. You know, Microsoft has definitely increased the hardware requirements, and there's a lot of computers out there that are working just fine, but are incapable of being upgraded to Windows 11. Installation media, you can purchase the media. You can actually go to the Microsoft store online and purchase the product key to allow you to activate your version of Windows. It's also possible, I mean, I think it's totally possible to, during the installation, like I downloaded an ISO file like I showed you a second ago, and we could install Windows from that file. I could skip the product key for what it's worth, and just say, oh, I have Windows Enterprise. It'll totally let me run Enterprise. It just wouldn't be activated, so there would be some things that I wouldn't be able to do on that operating system, like personalize it. But actually, I think even OSs that aren't activated still are capable now of getting updates, security updates. So we could use to get to this point where we're asked for a product key would mean that we've begun an installation, so we could install from USB, DVD-ROM. We could make our own ISO and create those ourselves, or use the media creation tool on the Microsoft site. So you have a number of ways of getting the operating system onto your device, and we'll learn a little bit later this semester there's some more sophisticated ways of doing that as well. You do have to configure your machines to boot up and look for the CD-ROM or USB drive first before the hard drive if you want to try to force it to get the OS off, a new OS off your media. We have clean installs. I'm not even sure I had left this slide in here, to be honest with you, but during a clean install, there's a number of things you have to answer. I think, in my opinion, just watch the TestOut does it, and they do a pretty good job of showing you all the steps along the way in setting up a machine. All right, we're almost there. I'm going to skip right now the content on the Windows 80K. What I will say, this is a very complex tool, and take the video and just kind of focus on the 10,000 foot view of it. Don't get all bogged down in all the details, because there are a lot of third-party tools out there as well that help with deploying Windows. And I think in this course, the important thing is just getting a big picture of what can be done, but I wouldn't get all bogged down in all the details. We've talked about quality updates already and upgrades. I think, like I may have mentioned, I can't remember the first time, a while back, but Microsoft used to had feature updates every 6 months. That was too much for them. I think they probably had too many software developers quitting, or who knows what, so they dialed it back to once a year we see a feature update, not every 6 months. The Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, it's a very sophisticated tool that can also be used for provisioning desktops, laptops, and servers, essentially pushing out operating systems to them. It requires a big investment of time, not money, and it's free, but it takes a lot of work to set it up. And I've got a couple links in my slide deck if you want to watch those. If you want to watch those, I should have shared them with you. If not, let me know, and I can email this to you, or email you the slide deck here. But if you watch the video, you'll be impressed on what can be done, and you also will be impressed at how confusing it is. So for now, let's just say it is possible for free, to use Microsoft products to configure them so that a server can take an image, like a configured Windows 11 operating system with, software installed and everything else, and they can deploy it, actually multicast, so it can basically send one data stream out that's picked up by all the devices on a local area network, and you can re-image them. So what that means is I could configure all 22 computers in this classroom where I'm sitting right now with Windows 11 in about an hour. So it's definitely worth the investment, but it is an investment to get to that point. It's not something you can use at home for one or two machines. All right, you can, by just putting a product key in, go from Windows Pro to Enterprise or Windows Home to Windows Education as an example. So that would not change the addition of the operating system like 23H2 or 22H2, but it would change the version, Home to Enterprise, Home to Education, just by putting a product key in. And quite certain we can find it on my laptop here pretty quickly. Let's just see here if I put change product key. Change product key. Oop. Yeah. Change product key. So if I had I think this machine is currently running Education, Windows 11 Education, but if I want, let's say, move it to Pro, if I had a Windows 11 Professional product key, I could put that in there, hit next, done. There's other ways of having this happen as well. You can see that I'm currently logged on with a Microsoft account onto this machine. More on that later in the course. But I could have purchased the product key through the Microsoft store, and then when I logged in with my Microsoft account, this would automatically get the product key from my Microsoft account on the system here. Another way of doing it. And yes, you can upgrade from Windows 10 to 11 free, and when 12 comes out, you'll be able to upgrade from Windows 11 to 12 for free. I tried doing this in NetLab, and it did not work well. And I don't know if I was just killing the server or if there was something weird. I'm not sure why it failed, but it's possible in a normal environment. This is that go back what I was talking about earlier, where you have like you can get like 10 days rather to go back to a previous edition of Windows. And that's it. Wow, 37 minutes. Thank you for spending 37 minutes of your life listening to me talk about Chapter 2 and TestOut. Have a great day.